The topic of today is about a tool that I've been working on for close to a year. It's an open source tool, and it's called JDD. The idea behind this tool is to help out with the release process of any project. So I'm going to give out a little bit of information on how the tool came out to be and why it exists, how it works. There will be a demo, and finally we'll close down stating what's to be expected for the tool. So feel free to ask any questions as you go by, and we'll collect all of them and answer them at the end of the session. So my name is Almiray. I'm currently employed by the Oracle and working at the database group. And one of the things that we do in the database group is, well, besides producing the database that everybody knows, we have other projects and products that are and happen to be open source. And that's the things that I like to talk about. So if there's anything that is related to those things like Docker images, Oracle XC, the JC drivers, and so many other things that we have, well, I'll be very, very happy to talk to you if you want to know more about those things. Today, we're going to talk about a tool, an open source tool that I started to write like a year ago. And this is the reason why I started this thing. I've been working with open source for many years. And one of the things that I like to do is write desktop applications, whether it's Swing or JavaFX. Now, you may be thinking, well, actually writing a desktop application is not really that difficult. It's quite straightforward. And once you're done, you package it in some way, and you want your users to be able to consume it. And you will do the same thing for a CLI application or for any other kind of project. You want binaries and then deliver them to your users. Now, it's not enough to simply say, I create a zip file and then put it in some page and will expect my users to find it. We actually have to think more about the different ways that the user can consume saved binaries and saved releases. The user, if they are using OS X or Linux, they might prefer to install binaries via Homebrew or Snapcraft. If they're using Windows, maybe it's Chocolatey or Winget or Scoop or something else. We also have to think about, do they have the right version of Java for running the application, or do we need to bundle a particular Java runtime with the application? What about announcing the release? Where should we do it? Well, what distribution channel should we use to say, hey, there's a new version of my particular release? And what about automating documentation or release notes or changelogs? So there are many things that we can get from the project itself's metadata, but putting everything together so that at the end of the day, the user simply says, oh, there's a new notification, there's a new version of binary, and then download it. There's something that needs to happen in between. And this is where I was like a year ago before I started this tool. While I was thinking what to do about my particular JavaFX application that I was writing at the time, I found two other projects. One of them is GoReleaser, and this works for the Go programming language, and the other is JBank, which works in the JVM. So also, like a year ago, I started to write more Go code, and I wrote a single command line utility. And I wanted the consumers or the users of this utility to be able to use it very easily. Turns out that GoReleaser provides everything that I need. You simply define a model of your project and where do you want things to be distributed, whether it's Homebrew or a Scoop or an Amazon S3 bucket, and signatures and checksums, so many things. And Go does that for you. GoReleaser does that for you. Sadly, it's only for Go. Doesn't work for Java. And on the other side, JBank is a CLI tool written in Java that allows you to launch Java source files as if they were, treat them as if were script files. But you can also launch jars and a few other things. It's an amazing tool for the many things that it allows you to do. And the author of JBank also faced the same problems as myself. He wanted users, to consumers, to be able to grab the binaries very easily. So he pretty much figured out a way to do all the distributions like GoReleaser, but for JBank. But it's only specific for JBank. It doesn't work for any other project. So Max and I, Max, the author of JBank, were talking one day, and we ended up with this realization. What if there was a tool like GoReleaser, but for Java, that would take in all the lessons learned from JBank so that you could use it with any Java project? And that, my friends, is exactly how the JReleaser tool came to be. So it's a tool that allows you to release projects all kind of Java projects, and later we make sure that you could also release non-Java projects. So if you're working with Python or JavaScript, or Rust, or something else on the side, you can also use this tool. So what it is, here's a big picture of what the tool is. You keep using your build tool, Apache Ant, Apache Maven, Gradle, or what have you, and you create binaries. So it could be a zip file, a tar file, an uberjar, a DMG, whatever it is, whatever you want to release. Also supply a model written in a couple of formats that we'll see in a moment, and this is the metadata of your project. Given this, JReleaser can create Git releases in popular Git repositories such as GitHub, GitLab, and GitHub. It can create those platform-specific packages if you need them, like Homebrew and Snapchat, Chocolatey, even JBank. And alternatively, well, additionally, it can also announce a release to many distribution channels. The most common ones could be Twitter, an SDK, or SDK Man, or Slack, or like a forum like Zulip, or even Discord. How does it do it? The tool is pretty much a file template engine. And you can think of so what this workflow is displayed is all the different commands or the different phases that you have access to when you're using the JReleaser tool. The orange command executes the blue, the violet, and the green columns one after the next. So when you say full release, what you actually saying to the tool is do everything that is needed to create a Git release. Then if you have any platform packages, such as Homebrew, then create the formulas and push it that and publish it to a Git repository. And if you have any announcers configured, again, like Twitter or SDK Man, then continue and do the announcement. You can, if you want to, invoke any of these steps independently from one another. So if your current release process already has a way for creating Git releases, but you only care about the platform-specific packages, Homebrew, like example, then you can skip the blue column and just call the violet. Or the other way around, you already know how to publish to Homebrew, but you are missing the Git release and the checksums and everything else, or you want to change it, so you can use the blue column. As mentioned, JReleaser expects the binaries to exist already, to be built by other tools. But in the fourth column that we see here, the one in black known as assemble, this is another command that you can invoke separately from the others. This will allow you to assemble custom Java runtimes cross-platform with JLink. That means that if I am, let's say, on a Windows node, I can generate a custom Java runtime for OS X or Linux or any other JDK that I pass in. It's not only Windows. That's a good thing about JLink. In contrast, JReleaser also allows you to build native executables using GraalVM native image. Unfortunately, for GraalVM, you must run it on a specific node, on a specific platform to get the final executable for that platform. So if you're on Windows again, and you want to generate an executable for OS X, you're out of luck. You have to be running on OS X. If you're on Windows or on XS and want to generate an executable for Linux, well, you could use Docker, but it's one extra step that you need to configure, right? In any way, it's possible, but it's not as simple cross-platform as you would do with JLink. For this reason, JReleaser gives you the option to build JLink and native executables, but you may also use Maven, Gradle, or any other build tool that you already have, or any other process to create, say, binaries. In terms of integrations, the tool can talk to many different services. I already mentioned a few. If you want to create a Git release, then you can push it to GitHub, GitHub Enterprise, GitLab, GitLab Enterprise, or any custom instance, GitHub, for which you have to run your custom instance, or Codeberg, which is a free service that is based on GitHub. If you want to talk to other Git services, such as Amazon Code Commit, or Bitbucket, or Azure DevOps, you can use the generic Git integration that we offer. But for now, the full set of release features are not yet supported. So JReleaser does not create a release page for you yet in these additional services, but at least it will allow you to tag and do a few other things. For uploading artifacts, besides adding them as assets on a Git release page, you could have the option to push them to a JFrog Artifactory server, whether it's your own Artifactory or the JFrog platform, which is available for free. Or you can use a regular HTTP server that you are in control, as long as the server supports a post or a put operation. In terms of platform-specific packages, these are the whole list that we currently support. So Homebrew works for Linux and OS X, Chocolatey for Windows, Docker is pretty much where Docker works. JBang works on all three major platforms, and it's another way for you to launch a jar file. Scoop works for Windows, it's similar like Homebrew, if you know what you have seen Homebrew before. SDKman works on all platforms, and Snap or Snapcraft works on Linux. In terms of distribution channels, well, you can announce it to Twitter and Slack, perhaps they are the most common ones, and also SDKman, but there are a few other options. And if the tool that you like to use for announcement does not appear here, then you have two choices. You can submit a ticket to our issue tracker and figure out a way how we can add it. Or if the tool supports generic incoming webhooks, then you can use the webhook publisher and it should be ready to go. How do you launch the tool in order to use it with your projects? It depends on the platform. So if you're using OS X, you can install it via SDKman, and as you would do with any other SDK tool, for which you require a specific version of Java to run. You need a Java runtime for Java 8 minimum. JBang, you can launch the CLI using JBang as well, and I think that we have an instruction for the JBang launcher so that it will download an appropriate Java version. I think it's Java 11 as a minimum. If you already have Java 11 or plus, then no additional download happens. Otherwise, it will download a particular JRE for you. Or Homebrew, of course. If neither of these options look appealing to you, or for some reason you can't use them, you can go to the release page of a particular version and download. They have the choice to download two zip files. The first version is only the production code, the tool itself, and you require a matching version of Java to run, again, Java 8. Or if you use the standalone version, this is a custom Java runtime built with JLink that brings the required version of Java to run the tool. So there's nothing extra that you need to launch the tool just by unpacking this thing. For Linux, similar choices, SDKman, JBang, or download the release files. Well, there's also Snapcraft, if I'm mistaken. For downloading the zip files, you have three choices. Again, the same zip as before, where you require a specific version of Java, a standalone version for glibc distributions such as Ubuntu, and another standalone version that is compiled using Muscle. This is what you would typically use if you're running on Linux Alpine. For Windows, I think I'm repeating myself, SDKman, JBang, Scoop now appears instead of Homebrew. And again, you have two choices for the zip file, the standard one which requires a specific version of Java, or the one that includes a custom Java runtime just for Windows. If you're running on Java 11 or plus, you can use this very trivial single source file. It's like a Java script that you can launch from source thanks to a version of, thanks to a JEP coming in Java 10 called JEP 330 launch from source file. This basically downloads a Java jar and puts it into your computer, and then you can execute it. For this, you definitely require Java 11 because that particular jar is compiled with Java 11. Or you can use Docker images. The first Docker image is built based on Ubuntu, and the second one is built based on Apache, on Linux Alpine. So you can use many ways. You can run it on the command line, regular CLI with everything that I showed before, or you can run the tool as a Maven plugin, as a Gradle plugin, or as an Apache and task. We pretty much support all the major build tools. If you happen to be using the tool or want to use the tool in a CI/CD environment, then we have guides for all these different services. We have explicit support for GitHub Actions. There is a GitHub Action for JReleaser that simplifies how you want to configure things. The Docker image that I showed earlier is aware of the specifics for GitLab CI, so you can use it directly as is. There's no need to create another image. But if there were something that were missing in this particular integration, then again, opening a ticket will be the right way to go. So the inputs that you supply to the tool, once again, it's a binary distribution or a zip or a tar file that may be created using Maven or Gradle. So there are plugins in Maven and Gradle that can create these distributions. It's typically a zip file that contains a bin directory with a launcher script and a lib directory with the jar files, and maybe there's a license and readme of any additional supporting files. Or it could be a single jar that contains all the dependencies, also known as a uber jar or fat jar that may be executable. It could be a JLink distribution. It's a zip file that contains the custom Java runtime and the additional production code. It could also be a GraalVM native image for any of the major platforms where GraalVM runs. Or it could also be a native package that you create by hand or by you create, well, any other tool or using JPackage, which means that if you use JPackage to create, let's say, DMG and package for OS X or MSI NXE for Windows or RPM and Debian for Linux, then you can also publish them or announce them or release them using JReleaser. Well, enough of the theory. Let's have a look at the demo. So what I have here in this particular website, I have, no, that's not the one that I want to see. I want to see this very simple application. It's a Maven file, it's a Maven project. The application is a very simple, trivial, no, that's not assembly, that's the thing that I want to see. I want to see the source file. Looks like this. Come on, it's taking a bit longer to reach. Here we go. It's a trivial CLI application that, if not mistaken, outputs hello and some name. That's it. There's nothing more to it. All right. We go back and we see that there are no releases and no tags. And just because I want to do this, let's look at the commits, and you notice that the commits follow a particular prefix. This is a particular thing for this project. It has nothing to do with JReleaser. But if I were to follow a particular format for my commits, then I can do things later that will be much more interesting. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is check which version of JReleaser I have and which version of Java. So I do Java version. Let's do 1 dash because I'm running Java 8. And let's look at what version of Java I need to run this application is 1.8. Good. And if I show you the files here, you notice that there is a JReleaser file at this point, but not going to use it for the first release. Also, JReleaser, which version I have right now? This is the latest version. How do you can install it? Well, if you ask SDK man for the JReleaser candidate, you'll see there are 7 versions that are official, and I'm currently working on the latest snapshot to be released by the end of the year, on this month. Okay, so I'm going to do the following. JReleaser, I'm going to release a project, and I'm going to say config, auto-config. That means I'm going to take information from the metadata from Git, from the name of the project, and perhaps some environmental variables. So the minimum version that I need to pass in, or the minimum configuration that I need to pass in, is the number of the project. Because the name of the project will be the directory, and it will be taken also from the Git metadata. So if I do this, I should get a very simple release. So there's some basic information telling me that auto-configure is on, and I got some secret data that is loaded here. For example, the GitHub token that I required in order to push Git commits to my GitHub repository, and also to create the release. If these secrets were not exist here, then it would be expected to be an environmental variable. And if it's not there, then of course the whole process will fail. It is the right version number. It tells me that it generates a change log, and there are no input files. So there's nothing to checksum. There's nothing to sign again, no input files, nothing to upload because there's no Artifactory, no HTTP, but it does create a release. Okay, so let's look at that. Let's do a refresh. And now I have a tag and I have a release that was released just a moment ago. We click on that one, and what do we see? We see this format, which is just the Git commits in the order that they appear, and have one single asset, which is the checksums, but it should be empty. So here's another thing that we can do. Let's add a bit more format to it. I'm going to activate another feature called changelog formatted. I will take in the defaults, and I'm going to overwrite the existing release, because if I don't do this, then JReleaser will tell me there is already a release that matches this tag. I'm not going to delete it unless you tell me to. So doing override will instruct JReleaser to do that. If you don't want to override, but you want to update, such as changing the title, the changelog, or adding more assets, you can also tell JReleaser to do that. For now, we're going to override. So now we see there are two additional properties here that were set up. Generates the changelog once again. So when we refresh here, we go back to GitHub and do a refresh. Now the changelog looks a little bit different. So each one of these things is formatted like a list item, and we get at least the names of whoever contributed. But we can do better than this. What if we were to use the prefixes and try to separate this into different categories? And this is where the configuration file comes in. This is the one that contains the model of your project. So we have some basic data. What is the name of the name of the project? This additional metadata will come in handy if we were to create package managers such as Homebrew. We'll see that in a moment. The release pod tells me I want to release to GitHub. I'm going to override. I'm also going to sign any commits I make. I will create a discussion category that matches the release. And I'm going to format the changelog with these features, such that whenever a commit begins with its prefix, I will add a label. So that's what's happening here. Excuse me. And then we actually define the categories. Based on the labels that we identified before, we're going to supply these categories. And the text of some of the commits is going to be changed using regular expressions. The default is an empty replacement. So if it finds this prefix, it's going to be replaced with a string. So eventually, I'm removing the prefix completely. I also want to sign using PGP keys, which will be part of the final my secrets. I would like to create a Homebrew formula for this. And I have two binaries, a zip file and a tar file. Notice these variables names here. These are mustache templates. I can use the specific name, which will match app right here. I can use the specific project version, which will be 100. But if I want to release next version, 110, 120, or 200, I will have to edit this file. So you can do that, or you can rely on the evaluation of some of the previous defined values to have this to be a more concrete configuration that does not have to be changed with every single release. Okay, so I'm going to build the binaries just to be sure that they are there. So I invoke Maven, and it builds the tar.gc and the zip file. Perfect. Now I'm going to do JReleaser full release. This will create a Git release, create the package managers, in this case, Homebrew, and do announcements. I did not configure any announcements. So let's see what happens. There's no auto configure on. It shows me some data, and now it's calculating the checksums. This is the default algorithm, but you can add more if you want to. It also signs all files using my PGP keys. From where are they coming? They're coming again from these secrets that you can control. It logs all the assets to that particular release page. Then it creates the Homebrew distribution, and eventually will publish that to a Git repository. If the Git repository does not exist, it will create it out for you. And there are no announcers, so it will skip the announcers. Two additional things that we can see. There is this file called output properties that will contain some data that was evaluated by your project. So what is the latest hash? What is the version of Java that you use? What is the milestone if you have them? And a few more things. Another thing that you can see is at this location, our JReleaser, there is a trace log that contains everything that JReleaser did. So during the, the evaluation of the model, then the whole model is displayed here, everything, just so you know what was configured. And then you see all the debug statements, everything that happened. If you want to see the model, then simply say JReleaser config. And it'll tell you with color code what are the different elements that are actually going to be evaluated by JReleaser when invoking any of these commands. And as I said earlier, JReleaser has many different commands, many different workflow items. So you can invoke each one of them separate from one another. Right now, I have showed you the release command, full release, and config. Okay, so we push a release, right? I'm going to go to GitHub. I'm going to do a refresh here. And now the changelog looks different. Looks more looks with format. Now the prefixes are gone. We have categories. There is one commit that was not matched with labels nor categories, so we see it here. We also see the link to the author. We see all the assets. We see there's a button here that says join release discussion. We click on that one and we get the text of the release, and anyone now can comment on this particular release because it happens to be a discussion. We go to the top of the project, the repository. Well, there again, there's a release. There's only one release. There are no duplicates because we are writing, and the tags as well. Remember that we publish a Homebrew formula. That Homebrew formula lives here in this repository, Homebrew tab. We can see there is a formula that was updated just 3 minutes ago when we just did this publication. And here are the contents of the Homebrew formula that you can use to launch this application. It will match the URL or the asset and the checksum that was calculated and any other dependencies. We're using the defaults, but of course you can enhance this. And if this template were not to be the one that you're looking for, you can supply additional templates to JReleaser so that it can do everything that you need to. So far, I'm talking about GitHub. Most people use GitHub, but for those that do not, those that prefer GitLab, well, guess what? I have the same project hosted on GitLab. So I'm gonna move to my GitLab directory where I have the same project. I have the same sources, except the model is a bit different. The only thing that I'm going to change here in the model is that I want to release to GitLab instead of GitHub. And because GitLab does not have the notion of discussions, then I remove that setting. Everything else stays exactly the same. The changelog format, the signing of the files, the Homebrew packager, and the inputs is exactly the same. All right. So let's do a clean build just to be sure that I have all the binaries here. Here we are. And now I can issue the same command as before. So that so that you know that I'm not doing something funny, I'm going to look for that particular command and invoke it. Here we go. So loads the secrets again, calculates checksums, does the signing, creates a release, and uploads all the assets, and now creates the homebrew formula and pushes to a particular repository. So here on GitLab, there are no tags, there are no releases. I'm going to do a refresh. Now there's a tag. And if we look here into deployments, there is a release. Let's click on that one. And we have the assets. We have the formatted changelog, including the uses. We have that tag. We move to another repository, Homebrew tab, and we see that the formula was just updated 40 seconds ago. And here's a formula that looks very similar to the one on GitHub, except that now it has a different URL and a different checksum. But we're not done yet. I can go now to, it's Codeberg, right? It's a different Git service. The project looks exactly the same. The model is almost the same. The only change that I have here is that I want to publish to Codeberg. Everything else is exactly the same as we saw for GitLab, identical. So we do a build, make sure that we have all the binaries. And now we invoke the same release command as we saw earlier, this one. And let's see what happens. Checksums, signs, uploads, homebrew, boom, done in less than 4 seconds. We go here, there are no tags, there are no releases. Do a refresh, and now I have a release. The changelog looks identical to what we saw earlier. And they are the release assets. And I also have a homebrew repository that was just updated 20 seconds ago. And we click on that formula, and yet again, this based on the same template, but with a different URL and a different checksum. So this is the basics of what JReleaser allows you to do. But it's not for projects that can create binaries. If you have a regular Maven-like library, and you only want to create a Git release, sure, why not do that? For example, the Moditech project publishes binaries to Maven Central, but using Maven, but uses JReleaser to create a changelog and a Git release. There are no assets, but you can still use the tool. And if I'm not mistaken, this project makes use, it's not here. I think this project is somewhere, I have to figure out. I think it's in the parent, I believe. Here we go. This project makes use of the JReleaser Maven plugin. There is. For which the only thing that we do is specify the changelog formatting options. There's nothing more. Or for example, there is this other tool called Casey Cuddle. It's a Quarkus application that creates native images for OS X, for Linux and Windows. It's kind of like kubectl, but for Kafka Connect. So you have a CLI for working with Kafka Connect. And we use JReleaser to create releases, to post the binaries. So here you have it. Here's the changelog. So the authors of Casey Cuddle like to use icons and emojis. So this is specific for the project, has nothing to do with JReleaser itself. And we have the binaries. Here we go. You can have access to all the information that JReleaser gives you by just browsing to JReleaser and clicking on Get Started. And you'll see the basic information, what we saw already in the slides, and There are quick starts for all the different tools that you may encounter. If you want to know more about a specific tool, for example, all the different commands for the CLI, here is. Or maybe you want to know more about the Maven DSL, or is the Gradle DSL, or something else. If you want to know what you can configure in the file, for example, let's look at the announcers. Let's click on Twitter. Say we wanted to announce our releases to Twitter. Well, you will add a block such as announce, Twitter, and some parameters. Notice that, of course, the input file is YAML format. But if you do not like YAML, that's okay. You can do TOML, or JSON, or Maven, or Gradle. And every single snippet in the guide is written in the 5 different formats. And there's plenty of information more, such as examples. Ready-made examples. If you didn't know already, JReleaser uses JReleaser to create its own releases. And here it explains exactly what JReleaser does to create its own releases. If you navigate to GitHub JReleaser, you'll see there is a set of releases here. There's the latest early access, so this is a snapshot release, and this is a stable release. And all these releases, starting from the first one, and every single early access, which is a rolling release, have been created using JReleaser itself. Okay, now we're going back. We have a little bit more time. So what is looking for in the future of this particular tool? Well, I mentioned that we have integration with specific Git services. We may add integration to other Git services, such as Bitbucket, apparently is still very popular. Azure DevOps is another option, and we'll see what else comes up. Besides being able to publish to JFrog Artifactory on HTTP server, you might want to publish binaries to an Amazon S3 bucket. Some people still do that. For example, Lightweight Juggle or the JRuby project do this. Or if it's not Amazon, maybe there is another cloud provider that you want to use. So JReleaser might be able to support all these cloud providers in the future. And as I said earlier, you can use JPackage to create the platform-specific installers. But given that we already support a way for using JLink or Growl VM, native image, we may also be able to supply a way to use JPackage or assemble JPackage with JReleaser itself. So additional resources that I have for you, the website is jreleaser.org that we saw earlier. The project is hosted at github.com, is fully open source. If you are interested in supporting the efforts of all the contributors, then we have an Open Collective. And of course, we have a Twitter account when we tweet all the things that we're doing. Last week, we added support for internationalization. So we opened the door for the CLI to be internationalizable. We have 10 translations already. So if anyone from the Polish community would like to contribute a Polish translation to our CLI or the other resources, we'll be very, very grateful. Everything that we saw today is open source. And if you have not contributed to open source, there is one thing that you can do, and it's very, very easy. You encounter a problem with anything that we saw today, or any other build tool or project open source in your daily work, file a ticket. That's it. Engage in a conversation. Let us know that something is missing or something could be improved, whatever the thing it is that you found. You don't have to send code. You don't have to send test cases. If you have the time and the passion, certainly do so. But at the very minimum, just filing a ticket, it's plenty for us open source contributors. And that is everything that I have to say today. Otherwise, this is one of my passions. I will keep talking and talking, but let's see if we have some of the questions so we can go back to the studio.